The Secrets of Middle-earth is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth, where we discuss the hidden themes and deeper layers found in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, whether in his writings or in any of the media derived from them. I'm Thomas Salerno, and joining me today on the panel are Patrick Mason. Hello, Pat.
Hello, Thomas.
And Jeff Haecker. Hey there, Jeff.
Hey, Thomas.
And be sure to follow The Secrets of Middle-earth on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, or Pocket Cast, which is the podcast player I use now that Google Podcasts is going away. And you can use any of your podcast apps or players of choice. And you can follow the show on the StarQuest YouTube channel. And please do us a favor by sharing The Secrets of Middle-earth with your friends. You can follow us on social media at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or on Twitter/X, where we are at SQPN, or on Instagram, where we are at StarQuest Network. And don't forget that you can get your own official Secrets of Middle-earth merch, including our awesome t-shirt with all the races of Middle-earth, at sqpn.com/merch. It's a great way to support the show and to show your love for Tolkien and his wonderful legendarium. Now, Jeff, before we get started, you put some news in our script here. We have news on a couple of different Tolkien fronts, right?
Yeah, well, just a couple things that I think someone actually put this in the Discord, so I'm not claiming it, but there's I guess it's an updated version or a compilation history of Middle-earth, or a new edition, I guess.
New edition, yeah.
Coming out. From what I could see, it looks like it's coming out in the UK in December of this year, and the US in next year. So I'm not sure. I think it's a January maybe for the US version, but because I guess I didn't realize this, but it's Christopher Tolkien's 100th would have been his 100th birthday next year. So.
Oh. Okay. Cool.
Obviously, he passed away a couple of years ago, but yeah, I think I saw that, and so someone had put that in the Discord, so that if you're interested in Tolkien and kind of getting more into it, that's getting a new set of the books could be a way to get in. I've not read really any of those, so something I might have to check out myself.
I've only just dipped my toes into the history of Middle-earth, so I'm looking forward to getting these sets, because some of them are hard to find, actually. So I'm glad that they're putting them out.
What's in those, I guess, is my question.
A lot of it is earlier versions of things that are in the Silmarillion. And that are, some of them are radically different. Kind of, and also similar to things like you would find in Unfinished Tales. Stories that haven't been finished yet. The one that I read was volume 12, The Peoples of Middle-earth, because that has the new Shadow in it, which was his unfinished sequel. And really, that's all of what I've read, and not much else.
Yeah, because there's the Unfinished Tales, there's the Lost Tales, there's the...
Right, the Lost Tales is part of the history of Middle-earth.
Okay.
That's part of it, yeah.
Okay.
So from what I'm looking at, it looks like that it's going to be in a couple different box sets, actually. So it looks like the first set that's coming out in December in the UK is Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, and then Book of Lost Tales Part 1 and Part 2 is what's coming out. And then the same thing in the US. So
they're putting the Silmarillion with it.
I guess at least in this version, which is from HarperCollins, I believe, is the publisher in this case. UK is HarperCollins, and the US is William Morrow. So for anyone who knows, gets more into the publishing geek side, and I think the UK versions are also like the classic covers, and I can send the link and we can put that in the show notes for anyone interested.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I scroll down further, and box set number 2 is Lays of Beleriand, Shaping a Middle-earth, Lost Road, and Other Writings, and that's coming in March. So there's and then more beyond next year. So
right.
Yeah. So I've not really read any of those myself. So I'd be interested to kind of get more into those as we go along.
And then there was like a bit of Rings of Power news, right? Including I remember in our Slack channel, Caitlin was saying that we might have a tentative release date.
Well, yeah, she was saying it looks like this September of 24, and I trust her on that because she knows has more inside information than I do. The only thing I saw that of note was that there's rumors of a big elven battle, and a lot of people are speculating it could be the founding of Rivendell, or like a battle that kind of leads to Elrond founding Rivendell.
That makes sense.
So that was kind of the only news I saw. I'm sure there's like her document had a lot more information, but that's kind of what I saw as far as like news goes. So
yeah, I want to say the strike. I don't know if it's just the Screen Actors Guild, but one of the strikes ended.
Well, they're both ended now.
They're both ended now. Yeah.
The writer's strike ended in the Screen Actor Guild, but I think the filming had already been done prior to the strike. It's mostly like post production now. Or I don't think it was the actor strike affected it, but they might have pushed things back because of the shifting release dates and such. So
right, or they couldn't do reshoots or something.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah.
You know, it kind of makes sense from a release standpoint because Amazon released or is in the process of releasing the Wheels of Time season 2.
It just that ended just a week ago or so, or a couple weeks ago.
And then The Boys will probably be their winter release, and then into the summer, and then circle back around to Middle Earth.
Yeah.
So, Pat, we would like to officially welcome you to the show. I mean, you've technically recorded with us before, but that is a special episode that won't be released until the future from this episode. But Pat, I'm sure regular SQPN listeners recognize you, but for those who are unfamiliar, why don't you just, introduce yourself, say, just a little bit about yourself and how you came to discover Tolkien and his world.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Pat. Catholic, obviously. I have a wife and a couple children. I live in the DFW area. I work in the power industry. Yeah. Deep in the Republic of Texas. I work at a power plant. I've worked at 3 or 4 power plants now in my life. I used to work at nuclear plants, and that was fun, but very regulatory heavy. And I work in the non-nuclear side, which is just a lot more fun, in my opinion. But, sort of discovered SQPN the way a lot of people did via Jimmy Akin, and discovered the other shows and eventually got invited. And I think the first one I was on was Star Wars. So I sort of moved from that into movies and TV. Now I'm over here on Middle Earth, which is awesome. So it's funny enough because that's like out of those 3, Middle Earth was probably the one I was introduced to first as a kid. My stepfather really loved The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings books. And that was sort of like our bedtime reading. Like me and my stepsisters would all get in bed or, in their room. And then afterwards I'd go to my room, but he would read a passage out of, one of the books or so. He did pretty decently with the voices. He wouldn't sing, which was sad. Like when I read the books to my kids now, I sing when we get to the songs. 'Cause I think that's more fun, but it's sort of like it kind of instilled in me this concept of like worlds and like the whole the written genre sort of kind of opened up to me from the Lord of the Rings series, and like it's just how much there was to it. And I can remember very distinctly while I was reading to my daughter, we started the Lord of the Rings, and she started asking questions like, well, what does that name mean? And where does that come from? And it's like, oh, and you could just see like her face like light up. There's like a whole bunch of other stories behind this, aren't there? And I'm like, yes. Good. So, but the Middle Earth has always had a very special place in my heart because it's sort of it was the first world I ever discovered, beyond my own, at least in the, in literature. And so, I love it. I come back to it. I probably reread The Lord of the Rings every 5 years or so, and The Hobbit. Right now I'm doing it with my kids, so it's sort of easier. Like there's a reason, but even without the reason, I'll do it and I'll listen to it on my own. And I think I have 2 or 3 different audiobook versions, as well as the audio drama that the BBC did. I have that on tape, like cassette tape, in this cool wooden box that it came in. I can't remember where I found that, but yeah. So yeah, I've always been a fan as long as I can remember.
So you were already, well aware of it by the time the Peter Jackson movies are coming out.
Oh yes. Oh yeah.
That's cool. Because I sort of discovered it around that time.
Okay. Yeah, no, like me and my high school friends we would watch the movie in the theaters, and then we'd spend like 4 or 5 hours afterwards at Steak and Shake debating what they did well and what they didn't do well, and what was what was good and what was bad.
But yeah, I know when I did discover it at around that time, it turned my whole conception of like what was possible in like sci-fi fantasy literature just upside down. Which is what it opened up like a whole new world to me.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. And speaking of like whole new worlds, today we are talking about the creation of the world in Middle Earth. And I kind of want to explain why, because our listeners may remember that from last episode, we announced that we were going to record an episode on the Council of Elrond for December, and we still might do that. But because of scheduling conflicts, we had to alter our plans a bit. But that's okay, because as we were talking on our sort of private channel, we decided to we were talking about like, oh, maybe we should do like the different battles that are in the Silmarillion, right? And then I was just, I think, Pat, you brought that up.
Yeah,
originally.
I love the battles.
And then I was like, well, wait a minute. Why don't we just do the Silmarillion, like a couple of chapters at a time? Because I know that now that the Rings of Power have come out, like a lot of people are actually kind of realizing for the first time that there's more stuff besides, like casual fans are realizing that there's more stuff besides just the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. And so who have kind of been, introduced to this idea that there's earlier ages and stuff, things that are kind of just hinted at in the Rings of Power and are done, for better or worse. We're seeing some of it, but I think that it would be just cool to kind of like go through the Silmarillion as we wait for the Rings of Power to come out. And don't worry, folks, we're not going to be doing this every episode. I've decided that we should kind of stagger it and alternate it with different topics. But it's cool because like hopefully it'll kind of get us back into a twice a month release schedule, hopefully, and before Rings of Power eventually comes out, and then we'll be doing this every week as the episodes come out.
Just as long as we do, multiple episodes on Beleriand and its realms.
Oh no. The realms of Beleriand, the geography chapter. Yeah. No, yeah.
No. See, if you take a left at this stream, you go over the ford.
Right, yeah.
Wait. Which age are we in now?
But yeah, so, I've heard many people say, they'd like to start reading the Silmarillion but are intimidated by it. And so it'd be cool to kind of give people to do this initiative where like, we do these deep dives into the different chapters. And before we start, though, I want to shout out again our friend and fellow panelist, Caitlin Fascista, because her website, teawithtolkien.com, has some terrific Silmarillion resources for beginners. And we'll put this in the show notes. It's teawithtolkien.com/Silmarillion. There's a free reader's guide, blog entries, a reading schedule, all kinds of great stuff. Because, the Silmarillion does intimidate people. It's similar to the way I think people are intimidated by the Bible, because it's basically the Elvish Bible. So it is a little bit intimidating for people. But actually, I didn't even put this in my notes, but I should probably ask you guys, when did either of you discover, or how did you discover the Silmarillion? What about you, Jeff?
So I was probably at least aware of it when I read Lord of the Rings, and because I read Lord of the Rings in high school or early high school, right around when the movies were coming out. I believe I read the trilogy before the movies came out. And so I knew there was more detail. I don't think I read the Silmarillion until maybe 3 or 4 years later. I remember reading it in college and not really understanding much of it.
Same, yeah.
I liked it, and it was like interesting to read, but just it can be very dense, and I was approaching it like any other novel, like let's just read it from start to finish, and I'm more of I think I've said before, like when I read, I have a hard time focusing on the details. I want to see what happens in the story, and so like I'll sometimes skim a little bit, which is not something you want to do with any Tolkien, but especially this, because it can be so dense. But yeah, I read it then, and then a couple of years ago, which kind of like led to me being on this podcast. So like on another Discord, we started doing a book club of the Silmarillion, and we do like a section a week, and it was a 2 or 3 month process to read the whole thing. But like reading it slowly, and I've listened to other podcasts since, and I think going back to Caitlin, I think she has a podcast on her own site about discussing it as well. I'm right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but doing that kind of got me back into, got me into reading the Silmarillion, and having read it, like I felt really well prepared for Rings of Power, and like knowing what was the context for it. So yeah, I've read it. I want to say I've read it twice now, and I'm probably due for a reread at this point. I guess I have to now that we're doing this discussion. So these discussions. So, but yeah, I've read it probably twice, but I've like it always leads me down I said before. This stuff always leads me down a rabbit hole. Like there's a term I look up, and it's like the battle of something or other, or this like sword or something. I'm like, ooh, what's that? And like I go and I'm 30 minutes into reading on a Tolkien rabbit hole. So yeah, good times.
What about you, Pat? You discovered, The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings when you were younger. What about the Silmarillion?
So I believe I read the Silmarillion in high school. I think I came I listened to those books, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, younger, and then eventually I started reading on my own, and eventually I got to the point where, well, I could reread this, and I did, and I just sort of discovered how enjoyable it was to read on my own, and from that it was in the phase of like when I read a book from somebody, typically I was like, well, I'm going to read everything they've ever written. And I'd done that with a couple authors at that point. And so I was like, why don't I do this with Tolkien? And so then I went and picked up the Silmarillion. And I remember reading it going, I can't read everything this guy's ever written. This is not going to work. I got through it and I was like, this is a very different work. Like this, there's just so much here. And, as a typical high schooler, a lot of it just went clear over my head. And it wasn't until I was in college and I was, talking about some of the stuff from it with my friends, and I realized how little of it I had really absorbed, and things I thought I knew that like I didn't know, And so I went back and I was like, no, I'm going to reread it. I'm going to understand this thing this time. And so I very purposefully went through it and tried to read it. And, pulled out, I think that's when I got the Atlas of Middle Earth, so I could figure out what the heck was going on with the various, and I would go back and reread passages and go, okay, so when did the lamps come down, and what did the earth look like, or what did Arda look like at that time, and that, and then I think, and since then I've listened to it a third time, and I don't recommend that. Just because, like, I tend to get overwhelmed by names very rapidly, and he will just drop 15 names in a paragraph, and I'm like, I don't.
15 names for the same person,
right?
In 5 languages.
Yeah. Who is also known as, but he was known by these people as, and I'm like, I don't. It just I'm so, and they'll mention him later on, and I'm like, I don't know who that is. I don't even know where to go back to find that guy. So if you're reading it for the first time, I don't recommend it. I mean, there are definitely swaths of it that you can listen to and be perfectly fine. Especially the story parts and the beginning, the opening stuff. But when you get into like the real beginnings, where they're naming all of the elves and telling, and that's just rough. It's just rough listening to.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I was aware of the Silmarillion for a while before I read it, and kind of like I first became aware of like the second and first age stuff through one of a book called the Tolkien Bestiary by a guy called David Day. Now I know guys in the fan community, people don't like his books because apparently they are riddled with errors, supposedly. I was not aware of this when I read that book. All like what stuck with me was that, oh wow, there's a whole history behind all this stuff. And so I became aware of the Silmarillion through him. I didn't read it till I was in college. And I distinctly remember, okay, so in college, I lived off campus and I used to commute via train. And I distinctly remember sitting on the train. It was like an hour train ride either way to and from campus, reading the Silmarillion on the train and being hopelessly confused by a lot of the names, like we said, and trying to. I remember going through what is that chapter called? The one with that we joked about with all the.
Of Balerion and its realms, I think, or something like that.
Yeah. Where is it? Of Balerion and its realms. I have a distinct memory of reading that on the train and just being like, "What?" It was kind of difficult to get through. But no, when I read through it a second time later, when I think it was over a summer or something, and I had more leisure time, it was I was just like, this book is incredible. And I love introducing other people to it. I loved introducing my brother to the Silmarillion. He had read The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, obviously. And, he started reading the Silmarillion in his commute to and from work a couple of years ago. And when he would come home from work, I would be like, okay, so which part did you read? And we would have these great, discussions about it. And we'd be like, oh, yeah, that's awesome. Some of the epic moments, which I'm sure we'll get to later. But yeah, it's a strange book because it's not something Tolkien wrote start to finish. It was assembled from a bunch of his different writings written at different times by his son Christopher. And it wasn't actually published until, I believe, a few years after his death. It was published in 1977, I think. And I believe Tolkien passed away in 1973.
Yeah, because it's the 50th this year.
Right, yeah. So it was published posthumously, but he had wanted it to be published as a companion to The Lord of the Rings. In fact, if you read the published Silmarillion, there's a little foreword called the Waldman letter, where he's writing a letter to one of his publishers trying to justify, no, you should publish this with The Lord of the Rings. But the publisher was kind of a bit leery of that. Probably, also from a cost standpoint, they're like, we're already publishing this huge trilogy here, and the cost of paper and whatnot, we don't want to commit to this other thing that we don't know if it'll do well. But I'm glad that we finally got it. And one of the other things I like to tell people is that if you've read The Lord of the Rings and then you've read the Silmarillion, go back and read The Lord of the Rings again.
Yeah.
Because you're going to start to notice all those kind of references that maybe didn't make sense in your first reading of The Lord of the Rings. You're going to be like, oh, he's referring to that thing. And it's, it makes rereading The Lord of the Rings again such a pleasure, because a lot of the references of what different characters are talking about. And I like how Tolkien describes in the Waldman letter how these legends in the Silmarillion go from the high and cosmological to more intimate stories. And today we're talking about the cosmological, because the first part of the Silmarillion is actually not part of the Silmarillion proper. right? Because there's different sections of the book. Now, the Quenta Silmarillion is kind of the Silmarillion proper. That's the quest of the Silmarils. But before that, there's two brief sections, which we'll talk about today. And the first is, and this is kind of a jaw cracker, the Ainulindale. I remember I spent years calling it the Ainulindale, the Ainulindale or something like that. You know, I was so glad when I finally learned how this was pronounced. But yeah, the Ainulindale is the creation of not just Middle Earth, but of the whole universe in which Middle Earth exists.
Yeah. So sorry, just for
go ahead.
Kind of maybe explain, like in Tolkien, Middle Earth is a continent. It's not the world. The world is actually the world. The planet, for lack of a better term, is Arda. So just wanted to clarify that, because I mean, we say Middle Earth, we use it interchangeably, but if we're going to be technical, which I guess we should be if we're talking about Tolkien,
we want to be correct.
The Silmarillion,
the best kind of
Arda
correct.
is, yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. There's Middle Earth. There's Arda. And then there's Ea, which is the universe.
Ea is like creation.
Yeah.
Ea is like creation itself. So, but anyway, yeah, just wanted to throw that out there so that for our listeners.
No, yeah, and it's funny. I actually between when I first learned about this stuff and when I read the Silmarillion, I actually had the Ainulindale. I heard it read because at the local seminary and retreat house in my diocese, they were doing in the summer. They used to do these lecture series that anybody could just come to. It was a free lecture series, and one of them was actually on Tolkien. And the priest who was giving the lecture actually read excerpts from the Ainulindale, and it blew my mind. Actually, so what about you guys? What was when you first read the Ainulindale? What were your kind of first reactions, or like what do you think of it now? Was it also kind of a bit mind blowing? Because it definitely was for me.
Yeah, probably the first time I read it, I was probably very overwhelmed and didn't really understand what was going on. And as I've reread and listened to like other podcasts and things, I've definitely gotten more out of it. So it's definitely something. I'm not calling Tolkien scripture, but it's like scripture in that way that it's something worth revisiting, because you can, as you learn more about it and kind of understand more about it, you're going to get more out of it yourself, and you're going to understand more, and you're catch things that you didn't catch before. But yeah, I mean, it's just a very cool creation story of like, because it's, we'll get there in a minute, but it's creation as music. And Iluvatar, God creates the Valar or creates the Ainur, which are the Valar and the Maiar, which he uses to create the music that brings the world Ea into existence, and eventually Arda. So just a very cool, like, because I'm not a great musician, or I wasn't, but I was in band, so like I get like being that kind of was a cool like understanding of music, and like playing as a band and playing as a organization is just like, I was, not that I was like part of the creation, but it's like it's cool to when you're part of that, when you're part of a big musical piece.
Yeah, and we should say that Ainulindale is Quenya for the music of the Ainur. The Ainur being the kind of angelic orders of Tolkien's world, both the Valar, who are kind of like archangels, and the Maiar, who are more like, the lesser angels. But yeah, Pat, what was your kind of take on this sort of alternate creation story?
Yeah, I didn't really have a good grasp on it the first time I read it. It was sort of like, there were parts of it where I was sort of kind of confused as to what was going on. It was like, I thought this was a history, or was supposed to be Lord of the Rings. What is going on? And then I started to get to like, he starts naming the Ainur, and then we get to the Valaquenta after that, and that was sort of like my focus. I'm like, okay, I'm through whatever that was, and now we're going on to the stuff I'm interested in. And it honestly wasn't until after, it wasn't really until probably the last 10 years or so that I really started to appreciate it. and it kind of goes hand in hand with sort of a journey I've been on with reading scripture. I don't know, 8 years into, so I read a chapter of the Bible every day. And I started about 8 years ago. It took me 4.5 years, and I got through the whole thing. And so then I just started again. And so
Nice.
I'm into Ezekiel now, so I'm a little over halfway again. But because it's very similar in nature to a lot of those stories, and then the way I kind of had to train my brain to think about a lot of how scripture is written, allowed me to then read this in the same way, like not as sort of history, or as, to read it as more of a creation myth, and to understand like what that meant in respect to the other stuff in the book. And so it, like, when I read it now, or I listen to it now, like, I understand every sentence like means a lot.
Right. Yeah.
It's not just, there's no like throwaway fluff, right? It's every sentence is purposeful and has meaning, or possibly multiple meanings behind it. And it all hangs together in a way that was very purposefully done. It's not a kind of a haphazardly written novel, right? It's put together with purpose or with reason.
Yeah, I was lucky because, again, I was first initiated into the Ainulindale by like someone who knew it front to back and was explaining it in lecture format. So I was really lucky that way, so that when I finally got around to reading the Silmarillion like proper on those train rides, I actually really enjoyed the Ainulindale because I already had some background in it. But yeah, and it's like, and I just love it because to me it's almost like filling the gaps. It kind of tells that part that Genesis doesn't actually cover.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The fall of the angels, and like, what was going on with the angelic orders before, the creation of the physical universe. And I was just like,
there's that line in Genesis where God says, "Let us create," and people always say, "Oh, he's talking to other gods, or there's other gods around." And if you study it, it's like, no, that's not actually what it is. But you can kind of, maybe we can kind of headcanon that maybe this is Tolkien saying like, "Oh, it's God talking to the Valar," or something.
Right, because like ultimately, Iluvatar, Eru Iluvatar creates the universe out of nothing. And we should explain his two names, by the way. Eru simply means the one. So he's one god. It's a monotheistic universe, like in real life. Iluvatar means the father of all, or the all-father, which I feel like is Tolkien's little tip of the hat to Nordic mythology.
Norse mythology.
Yeah, you have Odin, all-father.
Yeah.
But no, Eru Iluvatar is not like Odin or any of the other pagan gods, because he's a transcendent god who's always existed from eternity and creates the universe out of nothing, but he allows the Ainur to kind of help him shape the form and history of the world. He kind of appoints them as like stewards or wardens of creation.
Well, you get into that idea of subcreation,
right,
in Tolkien, starting here, which we're all sub-creators under the one creator. Anyone who's has any kind of religion, a religion and a god like that, that created everything out of nothing. Like, everyone is a sub-creator. And so Tolkien's very big on that, and throughout, especially throughout the Silmarillion, and even beyond to some extent, but it's definitely most evident in the Silmarillion, because you later on, when we get into like creating the Silmarils, or creating, other items, crafting or whatever, everyone is sub-creating. So,
and I love that I don't know if this was intentional on both their parts, but in both Tolkien and Lewis's fantasy worlds, it's created through music. Because if you remember from the Magician's Nephew, Aslan sings Narnia into existence.
Yep.
I just love that. Yeah. And the Magician's Nephew, by the way, is probably one of my favorite Narnia books. Just as a little tangent, I love that book. And
that's at some point we need to do a recording on C.S. Lewis and Tolkien.
On Lewis and Tolkien, yeah.
Yeah, but
But yeah, I like that connection, but that they're both at the root of these two fantasy universes is music. You know, that kind of.
I want to say it's a Lewis quote, but it may be a Chesterton quote, and I can't remember. But it's that God hums the universe along, and he's just kind of like, it's sort of this notion that God's just walking along, you know, the street corner, humming everything into existence as it goes. And I really like that from my, you know, scientific background from college. I studied, you know, what I will call the mysteries of the universe as per our tiny understanding of it from a scientific background. And I love all of it. And I really love the underpinnings of the universe, like the kind of the laws that are set in place, and the fact that it works and everything just is in this wonderful dance and balance. But there's nothing saying that like that is how it has to be, right? Like like we live in a world that's sort of governed by entropy, and so everything sort of falls apart slowly over time, except the laws don't. Like the laws just keep going. Like, you know, it's as true today that if I, you know, roll a ball down an incline into another ball, it's going to make that other ball travel today as it was yesterday, as it will be tomorrow. Like the laws just keep going. They don't fade away. They don't change. They're not mutable. And it feels like, to me, this sort of notion that God is sort of just constantly singing it as it goes. Like it's just, he's, and I want to say it's Chesterton that has the line that like the getting old is not a function of God, because God loves watching the sun come up every day. It's just like a little child who says, do it again, do it again. Like
I think that's Chesterton. Yeah. That sounds awfully familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. But I love the idea of that sort of being sung into being. And again, I didn't really latch onto that idea until I was older.
Yeah, one of the opening lines is that the voices of the Ainur began to fashion the theme of Iluvatar into a great music, and a sound arose of endless interchanging melodies woven in harmony that passed beyond hearing. So he's even including them in the music part. And this is before he's created anything. He's kind of including them in this music, which we eventually kind of learn is this plan of the history of Ea and of Arda, of the universe and of the world that Middle Earth exists in. But then we have, you know, we start to get into the names of the different Ainur and stuff, and we get Melkor, who starts to introduce his own sort of unique music into the music, and it becomes this discord, which I thought it's a very interesting, I don't think allegory is the right word, but kind of symbolic, like, take on the problem of evil, is that it's a discord in the harmony of the universe. I just thought that was interesting. And that maybe like, Pat, you were talking about entropy, like maybe entropy exists because it's the discord
yeah.
of Melkor, that like the reason entropy exists at all is because before the creation of the universe, something got messed up. And so
yeah, that's, I mean, like from a theological perspective, I've pondered on that quite a bit. Like that conceptually, if we think about like living in a, you know, a perpetual time with God, and like, what does that mean? Like, what does perpetuality mean? And the lack of entropy, like you either need to have a continuous creation destruction cycle that's going, or you need to have a lack of a lot of things, and entropy is one of them. And I've always thought about that. Like there is this just like it's, and I don't remember where this is from. I think it was a role-playing game, but the concept of like prior to the fall, you know, everything, like the cosmos was all set up in circles. And then like the fall, because of how like discordant it was, everything ends up as ellipses and tilted on its side, and everything's spinning out of control, and nothing's working quite right anymore. And I do really like that sort of this view of, you know, because evil is like deprivation, right? So you don't have evil without good. Evil's not its own like thing, right? in Catholic theology. It is a deprivation of the good. So it's something you've done wrong or you're missing. And I think that lends itself really well to music, because like everybody knows what a discordant sound sounds like. Like it's just part of human nature. Like you listening to something and then a key is hit wrong or something is, and you immediately notice it. And I think that's a very good, I don't know what your symbol or allegory or whatever the right word is, metaphor, like simile.
The fact that we even know it's a discord is very interesting, because it means that there's something. It speaks that there's objective truth, because everyone can objectively say that note is discordant, that it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
And that opens up a lot of philosophical and theological questions, but I like that, when Melkor introduces this discord, it says he thought therein to increase the power and glory of the part assigned to himself. And so for him, it's not just enough to be one of the players, even the greatest player. He's got to be the conductor, even though he's obviously not, he can't be. But he just has this idea that like, oh, I know better.
Yeah, it's like it's getting into the subcreation thing where he's not really being a sub-creator. Like he's wanting to supplant the creator, even though there's no way he can. But that's kind of ultimately where we're going. And we've kind of talked about the difference kind of between him and like Aule. As we've talked before how Aule, I think even the last episode that just came out about when he created the dwarves, he was ready to kind of destroy them if it was not meeting with Iluvatar's approval, because he was wanting to subcreate and to honor Iluvatar, whereas Melkor is wanting to introduce this discord and play his own theme so that he can be, try to lead his own music or lead his own, contingent to create his own thing.
Right. Yeah. And I like how it kind of foresees Sauron in a way, both Sauron as we see him in the Legendarium and Sauron as we see him in the Rings of Power, because I like how in the Rings of Power, Sauron is basically like, if you all just listen to me and do things my way, things will be so much better. and if things go wrong, it's your fault for not listening to me. He like gaslights people, but it's like, I like that, he's trying to take control of things because he thinks he knows better. And if only you did things my way, things would be so much better. But which is interesting because, even though Melkor introduces this discord and the music it describes it like waves or like a storm where everything is becoming like going completely out of control. Iluvatar stops the music at one point and tells Melkor, those things which you have sung, I will show them forth that ye may see what ye have done. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite, for he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined. And that's essentially the Christian answer to the problem of evil, right? That God can take any evil that happens in the world and make a greater good out of it. Evil can't really mar God's creation. It can only add in the end to his own greater glory, right?
Right. Yeah, you have sort of this conceptuality of the like, no matter what, like the simple good would be better, right? If we were all in harmony and the song was never out of discord, it would have been good. But because of the discord, because of the evil, what we're going to bring out of that is going to be a greater good. And it's not necessarily that like, oh, the evil should have happened to bring the greater good. That's not the point. It's that like evil does not have the final say. It will all be wrought to a greater good. And I do really like that he kind of like, because it's interesting. You get the lines in about Melkor, like going off into the void and kind of contemplating on his own thoughts. And it's sort of this weird sort of like he's trying to be on his own, away from Eru. And Arrow's kind of like, no, dude, you can't. That's just not. It's not going to happen.
Right. And he's looking in the void for the flame imperishable, which is kind of Eru's creative principle. And of course, it says, the flame imperishable resides with Eru. So Melkor's kind of going completely in the wrong direction. He thinks he can find the flame imperishable by getting as far away from Eru as he can, when actually it resides with Eru himself. So Melkor's completely gone off in the wrong direction. He's literally disoriented, And of course, Melkor will eventually become the character we know as Morgoth. He's named that by the elves. So he's essentially Tolkien's... This is about as allegorical as Tolkien gets, because, Melkor is supposed to be Lucifer. And we're seeing essentially the fall of Lucifer. His name means he who arises in might. He's supposed to be the greatest of the Ainur. And like he says he has a share in like all the powers of the others. So, and that he's actually in the mind of Iluvatar, he's the brother of Manwë, and Manwë becomes the chief of the Valar. And Manwë is kind of a Saint Michael figure. So I find that interesting, that in the mind of Iluvatar, they're brothers. But the Discord, Jeff, you've actually brought this up a few times when we were reviewing Rings of Power, that the Discord is actually visualized in the opening credits. Like the Ainulindale and the music and the introduction of the Discord, right?
Yeah, because if you watch the credits, and it's been a little bit, I should have gone back and actually watched this, but if you watch it, it's at first, it's kind of one theme, everything's in harmony, but then you see like the introduction of Melkor's Discord and the theme like changes slightly, but then it kind of weaves back together, and it happens a couple more times, and eventually the credits get more into like what's happening in the ages of the first age and second age. But yeah, in the first part of the credits, it's like it's actually visually represented, and I'm not claiming that I came up with that.
No, yeah,
online,
I think they've the creators have even talked about it.
But yeah, just it's like, so if you haven't watched the credits to Rings of Power in a while, it could be a good kind of companion to this. But yeah, Melkor is just I've seen like the memes of Eru. It's like the caption is like Eru, creating the harmony, and then you see Melkor with the guy representing Melkor is like a saxophone player and just kind of like doing a solo. But it's kind of like, yeah, it's like that. He's just like tries to go and do his own thing, and just he's trying to kind of like he's very narcissistic, and I mean that's like we're seeing that in as we kind of go later into the story of Melkor Morgoth, he's kind of isolates himself even further. But yeah, it's interesting. He like before there's creation, like he's trying to get away from like he's literally trying to get away from the only thing that existed before him and to find how to create, or it's very like, I don't know, it'd be interesting to get more on like his insight into like why does he want to do that. It's almost like he always had that as like that he was going to fall, because like because that's kind of how we talk about the angels too, is, or what I've heard, I'm not a theologian, but what I've heard said about the angels is they were created with full knowledge, and then the ones that chose to not obey God did it at the moment of their creation. Like they had the knowledge of who God is, and possibly what God's plan was for the world and whatnot, and they chose to fall away from that. And whereas humans and we have a long time to grow our conscience and to develop that intellect, to we have to choose over and over again. But Melkor, and And yeah, as we read more, we'll see Melkor, like, he had chances repeatedly and just kept, it's like he kept choosing the wrong path almost every time. Like, there are times he tried to come back and may have, had a good intention here and there, but
right. He's also envious of elves and men who are called the children of Iluvatar, because they mentioned that Eru, after he propounds the themes to them and shows them the vision of Ea, of the universe and its history, up to a point, it says, like, he actually doesn't show them the later ages.
Yeah.
He shows them up until the diminishment of the elves. But even in seeing that, like, Melkor, he starts to become envious of the children of Iluvatar and their gifts and stuff. And he has it in his mind that it's like, well, if I didn't create these things, I'm just going to ruin them. And that seems to be a lot of his modus operandi in the beginning, is just whatever the Valar, when they go down into Arda, whatever the Valar build up, he's like that kid who goes around and kicks over your sandcastle after you've built it.
I mean, that's exactly how they describe him when they get when and it's what I find like very interesting is, so you have the themes play out, and then they're given the vision, right?
Yeah,
and it almost seems like from their perspective, they're like, oh, like, look at this cool thing we created, and then they're given the option to go down there. And then when they get there, they're like, oh, we're back at the beginning. Like, oh, now we have to actually build this thing. Like we sung it, but now we actually have to do it. Like, it's sort of like, okay, we made the directions, but we actually, we didn't build the furniture yet.
we drew the blueprint, but we didn't build the house.
That's right. Yeah. I like that as sort of a window into like how God understands things. I'm trying to think. Fulton Sheen had a good one of this, and it's like a 90-second clip or whatever, but he talks about God doesn't understand a building like somebody who goes to the building. He understands it like an architect, like the construction crew that built it. He knows it inside and out. He knows where every little thing is. He knows how it should have been built and then how it actually got built, because those are never the same.
Yeah.
And it's sort of this. I thought that was really cool too, like how the Ainur, in their transition from Ainur to Valar, they sort of like are reset. It's sort of like, okay, now that you've blueprinted this thing, it's time to get to building. And then you see the Discord playing itself out via Melkor in kind of real time.
Yeah, and Melkor's even when he's playing his Discord themes, he's other Maiar or other of the Ainur are, because they're not I guess classified yet, but some other Ainur are starting to like follow him, like as we've talked before, like Sauron and the Balrogs, they are Maiar, so they're like the ones that followed Melkor into that, who may have initially followed Melkor into that discordant theme. So he's like already he's starting, he's drawing others to him, in a bad way.
Yeah, because it's, by the time you get to the third theme, it talks about it like it's almost two separate orchestras playing, or two separate choirs. You know, like the braying of the trumpets over here that sometimes harmonize with each other, and they make some really awesome like notes and stuff, but it always seems to be based entirely on what's coming out of the choir that seems to be trying to go along with the Iluvatar's theme. And I think
thank you for reminding me of that.
Oh yeah,
because the description is actually kind of funny. He describes the two themes. He says one was deep and wide and beautiful, so the one being propounded by Iluvatar and the Ainur, but slow and blended with immeasurable sorrow, from which its beauty chiefly came. And now here's the description of Melkor's theme. The other had now achieved a unity of its own, but it was loud and vain and endlessly repeated, and it had little harmony, but rather a clamorous unison, as of many trumpets braying upon a few notes. And I'm like, it's Twitter! Loud and vain and endlessly repeated, like trumpets braying on a few notes. I'm like, it's Twitter.
It's Twitter. Yeah.
It's the worst aspects of kind of 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 modern sort of evil as we see it played out in the way people argue about stuff. And just like loud and vain. People think if we repeat these few slogans over and over and over again loudly, we can just drown out everything else. And I'm like, that was so prescient, of him to. But of course, he also lived through the 20th century where he saw the rise of ideologies like fascism and communism, where they're all about just chanting stupid slogans over and over again and getting masses of people to join in this kind of like communal, like what is it in 1984, the 5 minutes of hate,
5 minute hate
or whatever.
Yeah.
5 minute hate. Yeah, that's what it kind of reminds me of.
Let's start off, and that reminds me of like people who listen to the news in the morning. Like, you're getting your 5 minute hate on. Yeah. People are like, how come you don't pay attention to the news? It's like, because I want to live a long life, and I don't think I can do that if I pay attention to the news.
No, I try and explain that to people, and they're just like, what? I'm like, you've got to stay informed. I'm like, there's a difference between staying informed and essentially putting poison into your eyeballs, which is like, but in any case, yeah, I thought that was very a realistic way to describe what this kind of discord is, because you see it in real life, especially if you turn on the TV. But I like that eventually he says that at the end, which is not the end of the world, is not included in the Silmarillion, although Tolkien did write the Dagor-Dagorath, which is kind of the final battle. But he says that at the end of that, he hints at it in the Silmarillion, saying, a greater music shall be made before Iluvatar by the choirs of the Ainur and the children of Iluvatar after the end of days. So if it's a second music, doesn't that mean there's going to be a second creation? Right? Kind of like the new heaven and the new earth of Revelation.
Yeah, because when we did our religion episode of almost a year ago, we were talking about how the men are taken to the heart of Iluvatar, and the elves are kind of left. The elves are left in Arda to kind of see what that vision will become, and yeah, he didn't really come up. He didn't really give a clear answer on what that was going to be. We can kind of imagine maybe it's just like truly all the discord is gone, and it's just like a paradise for men and elves and everyone in some kind of afterlife, beyond even the elves, immortal lives in Aman. So I don't know. I kind of think of it as like maybe that's like, because we have in our faith we have the the end of times and what comes after, and we hope that we'll when that comes, if it's in our lifetime or beyond, that we're counted among the faithful and are with become part of the new creation. And there's if you've read Left Behind, like, and things like that, which I've read it in the past, there's which is not not exactly what we believe as Catholics, but there's like creation kind of starting over in a sense of like all the people who kind of the faithful are like back on earth and living, but we'll be in a potential glorified type of state at that point after the resurrection of the dead and all that. But we don't really know what that's like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just kind of it's one of those cool mysteries in Tolkien that's fun to think about. And it's like, what are these immortal elves and these men who, and the dwarves are in there, and the hobbits are in there somewhere, I'm sure. Like we talked, the dwarves maybe are like they'll kind of go to sleep to kind of like physically remake Arda and be there at the end as well. So yeah, it's just kind of cool, fun to think about, like after truly all the discord and evil has gone from the world, like, because even after Return of the King, it's a precursor, it's the mythological past of our world, So there's evil in our world today. So like when all that is gone, what will it be? It's kind of the way I'm thinking of it.
Yeah, I think it's one of those mysteries that sort of plays off the real mystery, which is, what comes after, right?
Right.
What is the new earth and the new heaven going to be like? And what are we going to be doing while we're there? Or are we going to be doing stuff? I assume I'm going to be doing stuff. I can't see myself.
Well, it's something that like I've thought about is like, what is heaven? What will heaven be like? What is it like for, the souls in heaven? And I think we always have to think of it as like, we don't understand the concept of eternity as humans. Like we can talk about it to an extent, but we like don't really comprehend it, because it's essentially an eternal, like it's an eternal now. Like it's a present that is always happening and always has happened. So it's like when you're, if you're face to face with God, like you don't need to do anything because you're fulfilling what you were created for. And so like it's weird to think about, because I'm the same. I'm like, I get bored if I'm sitting around doing nothing. like I need a TV show or a podcast or a book, or like even like I mind sitting and doing nothing and watching a TV show, but like I need something like that. It's really hard to like sit down and focus, in prayer and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's what it will be. That's, could be what it's like, is like eternally that's all you're doing and forever and ever and ever. And it's just, if you think about it too hard, your mind's going to explode.
Yeah. Well,
so
I remember it's a webcomic, Order of the Stick. But one of and it's based on Dungeons and Dragons, and one of the characters dies, and he goes to like one of the heavens, right? And he's hanging out in the good heaven, because it's based on like a weird view of morality. But either way, he's in heaven, and like he's hanging out with his parents, and he goes fishing with his grandfather. And someone mentions to him that it's been a really long time since he's been dead. Shouldn't his friends be getting around to resurrecting him by now? And he goes, I've only been here like a couple weeks. And his grandfather looks at him and is like, go ahead and ask your little like light ball that follows you around how long you've been there. And the light ball's like, you've been fishing for 17 days. And he's like, what? Because like the whole concept of like discomfort and like, because I can't sit still in a chair, right? Because eventually something will like fall asleep, or I'll have to move my legs or scratch my head, or like, okay, so what if you get rid of discomfort? What if you get rid of thirst and hunger and the need to sleep? And like, if you start removing all of these things that we need because we're like limited beings in a world of entropy, like, what is that kind of existence look like? Could you just fish for 40 years and not realize any time had passed? Like,
I mean, what is time in that context?
Right.
No, yeah, I mean, maybe that's why like Tolkien kind of avoided it, or rather Christopher like didn't put that, didn't put the Daggerath in the Silmarillion, because he's like, I want to avoid dealing with those questions. But yeah, and so the Ainulindale, it kind of has sort of a little supplemental section, which is the Valaquenta, which we've covered technically most of that material if you go back and listen to our episode about the Valar. Because it names all of the kings and queens of the Valar, and their chief Maiar who kind of serve them. And it also has a little bit of section on the enemies, talks about Sauron and the Balrogs and stuff like that. But did you guys have any like things that stood out though about the Valaquenta in particular? Or
I'll just say like so if you're reading this for the first time, like the Valaquenta might be, before you read Ainulindale, like the Ainulindale is cool, but it's very like much a dense like poetry filled section, whereas the Valaquenta is like, it gets you more into like more of a traditional type of story, because you're learning who kind of your chief characters, or some of your chief characters are going to be. So it's a little bit more descriptive. And so like if you start the Ainulindale and just aren't getting it, aren't having trouble with it, just maybe you could skip you could skip that part for now. Like definitely go back to it, but you could skip that part for now and then go check out the Valaquenta, which is getting you introduced to these, who's at least for part of the Silmarillion will be the kind of our chief players. But yeah, I mean, nothing else for me as far as it's a cool section because you're getting to learn like the various, Valar and their servants. And I think that's where we start getting into, who some of the Maiar are, like the Thorongir and, is it Thorongir is the Eagle Maiar, or is Thorongir the eagle from
Thorondor.
Yeah.
Thorondor.
Yeah, he's the chief of the Eagles. But
Okay,
I don't think he's. Yeah, I think he's only mentioned later.
Okay. Yeah. Well, but isn't the chief like they descend from the Maiar that was?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you get cool things like that.
They definitely mentioned Mounway and the Eagles. One part that stood out to me was that I feel like some of the writers on the Rings of Power have read this section very carefully because one of the Maiar who's mentioned is Osse, who is a vassal of Ulmo, the Lord of Waters, right? And it mentions how at the beginning of Arda, Melkor tried to tempt Osse to join his side, like he tempted Sauron, who was a vassal of Aule, right? And he actually gets Sauron to join him. Osse initially kind of flirts with joining Melkor because he's promised to be given all of control over the oceans and stuff. But Osse has a wife, Uinen, the Lady of the Seas, and it says, where we get? Sorry. Yeah. It is said that in the making of Arda, Melkor endeavored to draw Osse to his allegiance, promising to him the realm and power of Ulmo if he would serve him. So it was that long ago there arose great tumults in the sea that wrought ruin on the lands. But Uinen, at the prayer of Aule, restrained Osse and brought him before Ulmo, and he was pardoned and returned to his allegiance, to which he has remained faithful. Now, it's interesting that when Halbrand, who we know later is Sauron, is imprisoned in Numenor, in the jail he's imprisoned in, there is a statue of Uinen. Now, the Numenorians revere Uinen because she's kind of this lady of mercy and of tranquil seas and stuff. But it's also kind of reminding you that Sauron never had an Uinen. Osse was going to join Melkor, but his wife brought him back to the light side. And so there's that kind of acknowledgement that might Sauron have also not turned to evil if he had had any kind of companion or love in his life in that kind of way. And so I feel that in that instance, the writers had read the Valaquenta very carefully and brought out that in the visual. They don't explain it. It's there for you to see it if you've read this stuff. And I felt that was very clever. And I want to congratulate the writers. Like there's some other dumb stuff that they did, but that was actually very, very clever and very good. But
well, I was going to say, I don't know if you call this clever or dumb, but when Galadriel finds out who Halbrand is, Halbrand's trying to get her to join him, almost in that kind of a companion way. And he's like, forget exactly what he says, but it's something like, you can make me, you can make what I do good. Like you can be make sure, keep me in check and that kind of thing. And, I don't know if that's Sauron saying like actually wanting that, or if he's just like trying to trick Galadriel, probably the latter, but yeah, it's like that kind of seeking for companionship, which because Sauron is when we get to Lord of the Rings or even, in the later Silmarillion, he's utterly alone. Like, and that's and the same thing we're seeing that with Melkor and, the other, Maiar and that followed him. Like they're all utterly alone. Like they lose Shelob not Shelob, Ungoliant, the spider, and Sauron and others. They're just like, and the Balrogs, like they're all just like the Balrogs go and hide underground, and because they're just like they have no companionship. So yeah, it's definitely, you're seeing that, and you see that theme going back to the, like we were talking about, the Ainulindale of like going away from the Iluvatar and companionship, and that kind of, this part of what leads them down that evil path.
That's the thing too, because Sauron doesn't have friends; he just uses people.
Right.
You know, so I feel like it was kind of the latter in that by that point he's too far gone, and he's just saying those things to kind of, you know, work on Galadriel's kind of pity and sense of mercy, and is trying to just like use her to get what he wants. But there's still that sort of question, like, would he have turned out differently if in the beginning of his descent into evil there was someone like where Ossé had Uinen? So I just thought that was an interesting question that the writers of the shows raise. And it proves that even if they can't use legally a lot of the stuff that's in the Silmarillion, they some of them have at least read it and have read very deeply into it, which I think is good. It's good going forward so that we have less stuff like the Silmaril being the creation of Mithril, and we have more and we have more stuff like that. So
Yeah.
But before we close on the Valaquenta, though, we have a fun thing, because if you guys remember from our episode on the Valar, we created Valar names for ourselves. Jeff, you were Jeff Say, right?
Yeah, Jeff Say. I forget. I meant to go back and see exactly, but yeah, Jeff Say, and it was like the Lord of, you know, I think it was like food and wine, or, you know, food and drink or something along those lines, because, you know, I'm a craft beer guy, so
and I
like food.
Very Hobbit like.
I was the Hobbit's
That's
Valar.
right,
The
yeah,
Hobbit's Valar.
Right, the Hobbit's Valar.
Hobbits will always toast you.
Exactly.
And I was Thule, the giver of books, who in his, like, you know, giant cloak and whatever always has these little pockets where there's different books and things. He's the scribe of the Valar. But Jeff, no, I'm sorry, messed up. Pat, we invited you to create your own Valar name using Caitlin's handy dandy Valar name generator.
Yeah, so Pat, obviously, that's the easy part. First three letters, and then birth month January, so it's Way, so it's Pat Way. Or I could go Pa Way, but I kind of, at first I was like, no, Pat Way sounds dumb, but I kind of like Pat Way better than Pa Way. But so Pat Way. And originally when I first read this, I was like, writing, that'll be easy. Like, that's my like favorite hobby or whatever. And then I heard yours, Thomas, and I'm like, no.
Oh no.
I can't do that because he already did it.
Aw.
So but I have a good fallback, and that is because Tolkien didn't get like any love on that podcast.
Oh no! Whoops.
And so,
did we forget him?
No, you guys talked about him, but he was like the bro Valar, and
yeah.
I'm gonna be his bro. I'm like Pat Way, Lord of Sport and Games. And so, because I love, you know, I love football, I love baseball, I love basketball, I love swimming, you know, I love all the Olympic sports. If I have a choice of what I want to watch on TV, but half the time these days it's a sporting event, and then I love participating. I enjoy playing in sports, and I like playing games, like at board games and all kinds of that sort of stuff. So, like that's why Tolkien never shows up until the very end, because we're always engaged in some sort of sporting activity, and he gets distracted and doesn't realize he needs to go beat the doors down and drag Melkor out.
Nice. That's really cool.
Tolkien's bro, Pat Way.
Pat Way. No, I like that. So yeah, we are going to continue these Silmarillion discussions, and I guess I should have said this closer to the beginning, but like, guys, yeah, obviously we're going to be spoiling a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of cool things in the Silmarillion. So if you want to read along with us, please do, because we don't want to like ruin some really cool moments that are in the Silmarillion for you guys. So read along or come back later and listen to these podcast episodes, because there are some things that I'm glad I didn't know about when I read the Silmarillion for the first time, because there's some really epic moments in this book. And I want to thank you, Jeff, for collecting all this feedback. We have a lot of feedback to talk about from our listeners over the last few episodes. So our first bit of feedback is from our episode on the 1977 Rankin Bass Hobbit movie. Paul Leone writes, "This was so much fun. The Rankin Bass movies were how I first came across Tolkien. I also had the LP from Return of the King, if I remember right. So they hold a special place in my heart, even if there are some questionable choices in both of them." And also SQPN's own Catherine Laffrey says, "My childhood jump into Tolkien." See, a lot of people have said that. I've noticed ever since we recorded that episode, people have told me that, oh yeah, it was the Rankin Bass movies that first introduced me to it. I was like, wow, okay. Like there's definitely more people in that category than I thought. We also have another bit of feedback on that episode. This one is from XSC3, home of Hero Quest fans. He writes, in the Fellowship of the Ring, the Balrog is described as having the appearance of wings twice. I'll get back to that later. I misremembered that they sang "The Road Goes Ever On." It's not the same lyrics as in the book. The Hobbit movie and The Return of the King are far, far superior to the theatrical Lord of the Rings animated film, although it influenced the Peter Jackson version in several places. Also, other than the hilarious dinner party in the first movie, the Peter Jackson treatments of The Hobbit were inferior to this animated treatment. I think what he's mentioning about, we did mention the Balrog in the animated Lord of the Rings not having wings, and that being more book accurate. The book is kind of ambiguous. It mentions that the Balrog seems to have wings, but it's right. It's kind of ambiguous.
It's sort of like in the within the Shadow and Fire, it almost seemed to have wings, or
right.
But it doesn't say it has bat wings or anything like that. There's nothing clear.
I would just say that if they have wings and can fly, which isn't necessarily, like ostriches have wings and they can't fly. So, but if Balrogs have wings and can fly, why do they always die by falling into pits? Like the Balrog in Moria falls into a pit and dies, and the one in the Silmarillion falls off a pinnacle and dies. So if they have wings, they definitely can't fly. So I would just include that as a caveat. I would definitely say I did like the animated Lord of the Rings movie, and we will get to reviewing that on the show eventually. But I know some people, like the more hand-drawn, like animated style of the Hobbit and then the Return of the King movies. But we have even more feedback. Our episode on the One Ring, Lord Wife writes, "This was interesting. Thank you. Also, first." Why do people do that? Whenever they are the first comment something.
She wanted to be the one commenter to rule them all.
Yeah. I'm glad you guys found that interesting though, because it was a long time in coming that we should have talked about the One Ring long before, but I'm glad we finally got to it. And on our most recent episode on Elves and Dwarves, John Henry on Discord writes, "This show was just a delight today. Thanks. The insight about the free peoples and their attachments to honor, power, wealth, and pleasure was just," and then he includes a mind-blown emoji. "Also, loved the notes about how the enemy's power is made manifest in divisions." And kudos to Mike Schramm for coming up with the whole free peoples being attached to the different inferior goods of wealth, power, pleasure, and honor. That was really cool.
Yeah.
And I believe actually he either has written or will write a post on that for the Voyage Comics blog. If he has, I'll try to include it in the show notes. And Paul Leone writes on YouTube, great episode as always. As far as future topics go, I'd love to see you guys cover the nature of Middle-earth or the Athrabeth Finrod a Andreth. Now that is something from the history of Middle-earth. That's a deep cut. But yeah, I have not read that one yet. I know, Paul, you keep telling me to read the Finrod and Andreth thing. And I promise, Paul, I will get to it eventually. But
for our listeners may not know as well, like the history of Middle-earth are like, they're like partially completed kind of collected things. So it's like not as I guess clean and not as, as the Silmarillion is. These were more and some of the things in the history of Middle-earth are like the other versions of what we see in the Silmarillion, or other like, there's or expanded things. Like there's some chapters in the Silmarillion. Like I don't know the chapter of the Silm offhand, but it's the one where Turambar is coming into the city, and in the Silmarillion, it's not as descriptive as but if you go into the history of Middle-earth, I've listened to I've seen some descriptions of it. Like there's just so much more in there. So it's like, for one reason or another, it didn't make the, those specific lines didn't make the cut into the Silmarillion. So just for, to clarify it for anyone who kind of wasn't sure what we were talking about, it's right. So you can kind of think of it as like the
first drafts, almost
first drafts that we're kind of, that we can get to read and have fun with, but not, not the canon, as it were.
But from what I understand, the dialogue of Finrod and Andreth is actually very interesting, because Tolkien gets into a lot of philosophical and theological, exposition on kind of the nature of elves and men, and the sort of theological status of death, what it means, its theological implications, and also the theological implications of the elves' apparent deathlessness. So yeah, we should eventually get to that. Maybe when they release that section in the new editions, that would be nice. But yeah, but before we close out, did you guys have any final thoughts on the Ainulindale or the Valaquenta?
The only thing I want to say is I did have to correct myself. I was talking about the eagles being Maiar, and they're, from what I did a quick Google and quick web search, they're not. They were creations of Manwë. So I want to go back and correct myself there.
I always thought there was a debate about that.
There could be. Yeah, there could be. At least from what I was seeing, reading on some wikis, it was that they were creations of Manwë. But
there's question marks about Thorondor in particular as to whether or not he was a Maiar or not. But the rest of them are pretty much like, by the time you get to the Lord of the Rings, Gway here as the Lord, and the other ones that Gandalf interacts with, they're all very much still servants of Manwë, but
well, in my memory, I was thinking that the like whatever the first eagle was a Maiar, kind of like Ungoliant was a Maiar, who took spider form, and then her descendants ended up being Shelob, and the other like sentient spiders on Middle Earth, or in the world. So I was kind of thinking of it that same way, but just wanted to correct myself before anyone comes at me for it.
Yeah, the status of talking animals and what they are supposed to be is a bit ambiguous in Tolkien, because what is Huon? He's called the Hound of the Valar, but I'm like, is he a Maiar? I mean, he can talk and he's intelligent, but not all talking animals in Tolkien are Maiar. It's very confusing, but we should do a whole episode on the talking animals of Middle-earth.
Talking animals.
Yeah, that would be pretty interesting. We could talk about that fox that Caitlin was talking about on Twitter the other day from the Fellowship of the Ring, that random scene where that fox sees the Hobbit sleeping and is like, what's going on here?
That's pretty weird.
Yeah, it's implied the fox can talk. So I'm like, what's going on? But in any case, Pat, did you have any final thoughts on the opening bits of the Silmarillion?
I like the Valaquenta because it kind of goes through the first theme of what you get in and I'm never going to be able to say it correctly, the Ainulindale, Ainulindale.
Yeah, Ainulindale.
Ainulindale. Yeah, whatever.
Say it
Anyway,
5 times fast.
yeah, it's not gonna happen. But they kind of go through the sort of the opening, I guess, theme where they're sort of creating, and then you get the Melkor is the kid who's knocking over all the stuff, and he's like a mountain that's going around wrecking things, and it's sort of this quote unquote first war that the elves only really know about because the Valar told them. And I will say it caused a lot of confusion in my mind about the ages of the world and the themes, because they don't like the third theme is effectively the first and second ages, because it's the ages after the trees. It's the ages under the sun, right? Whereas like the themes are like the creation and then the lamps, and then you have the trees and the sun after that. And so you have like the lamps and the trees and then the sun, and sort of like I got mixed up real bad like as to what the ages meant. And so I try and correlate them to the themes now. It works better for me. So if you hear me misterming things in terms of ages, that's why. As we go forward.
Yeah, we will see the ages of the lamps, I think, very soon. And then followed by the 2 trees, which we've seen in the Rings of Power, and then, later the ages of the sun. Because technically what we seem to use this interchangeably. Like we say the first age, and what we usually mean by that when we say it is everything from like the creation to the fall of Morgoth. But really the first age, what is meant by that is the first age of the sun, which is everything from the death of the 2 trees to the fall of Morgoth. So it can get pretty confusing, but Caitlin's website, Tea with Tolkien or Tolkien Gateway, can help you guys with that. And please follow along with us. If you're reading the Silmarillion for the first time, I envy you.
Or maybe not.
Or maybe not.
If you're reading it for the second or third time, then you're kind of getting things.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for joining us, everybody, on this adventure. And we hope to do, more of these throughout the coming year. But that's it for this episode of The Secrets of Middle-earth. But before we go, we'd like to take a brief moment to thank our patrons who make this all possible, including Philip G., Danny L., Joshua G., Sean E., and Connie Z. Their generous donations help us to continue to create The Secrets of Middle-earth and all of the shows here at StarQuest, and you can join them at sqpn.com/give. And now we'd love to hear from you, all our listeners. Are you excited for our Silmarillion Deep Dive series? Will you be following along? And if so, will this be your first time reading the Silmarillion? What are your thoughts on both the Ainulindale and the Valaquenta? You can let us know at sqpn.com/middle-earth, or on our Facebook page, or on Twitter, or by sending us an email at middleearth@sqpn.com, or by leaving a comment on our YouTube channel, or by visiting the channel on the StarQuest Discord server at sqpn.com/discord. And be sure to join us next time for another discussion of the amazing works of J.R.R. Tolkien. But until then, thank you, Patrick, for joining me and sharing the secrets of Middle-earth.
You're very welcome. It's always a lot of fun.
And Jeff Haecker, thank you as well.
Thank you, Thomas. I would have tried to sing it, but nobody wants to hear that.
And once again, I am Thomas Salerno. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth on StarQuest.
Here's another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy. The Secrets of Sacred Art. Find it wherever fine podcasts are found, or at starquest.fm/art.